"Thank you for returning my hire," she said, pressing the card into my palm with both hands. "Cameron told me you signed it yourself. Networking for you, Dad." I did not blink. I did not correct her. I said, "Of course, my dear," and closed my fingers over a business card I had handwritten in the summer of 1987, in a private shorthand no living person other than my late wife had ever learned. My name is Gordon Whitfield. I am 71 years old. 40 years ago, I trained half the creative directors this industry now depends on. And my only son has spent 6 years selling that ledger of names as if it were his own. If you are watching from a city where you were once underestimated by the very people who owed you everything, tell me where you are watching from in the comments. I read every one. And hit like and subscribe, because what my son and his wife did next was the biggest mistake of their lives. And the reckoning waiting for them at the end of this story will be measured in decades. Now, let me take you back to the moment I understood the ledger had been opened. The reunion was billed as a 40th anniversary gathering of what one of the trade magazines once called the last handshake generation of American advertising. The hotel was downtown, 22 floors of glass and polished stone, and the ballroom on the 6th floor had been dressed for cocktail hour with white orchids and low amber lighting. I had almost not gone. Adele had died 2 years earlier, and public rooms had lost their gravity for me. But an old copywriter I mentored in 1984 had written to me in July, a real letter on a real note card, and told me the room would not feel right if I was not in it. So I put on the gray herringbone jacket Adele had chosen for my 60th birthday and drove myself into town. When I stepped out of the elevator at 6:53 that evening, the first person to see me, an art director I had once talked out of quitting, clapped his hand over his mouth and walked toward me at a pace that told me the room had been waiting. I had expected warmth. I had not expected the density of it. Nearly 300 people were folded into that ballroom, and by the end of the first hour, I had shaken more hands than my knuckles had shaken in 5 years. That was when the stranger crossed the room. She came at me from the far wall the way people come at you when they have rehearsed the approach in a mirror. Late 30s, dark hair pinned up in the way art directors used to pin their hair when they were still trying to be taken seriously in rooms full of men. She wore a navy dress with no jewelry except a thin gold chain at the collarbone, and she walked with a purpose I recognized before I recognized her face. She stopped a polite arm's length in front of me and said, "Mr. Whitfield, I have been trying to write you a thank you letter for a month, and every draft came out wrong. So I brought this instead." She was already reaching into her clutch. I said, "You needn't thank me for anything, my dear. Who am I speaking with?" She smiled, and something about her smile, a slight uneven quirk at the left corner, made me place her at last. Jasmine Ellery, 1987, a portfolio review a colleague had refused to sit through. A young woman with a leather book of hand-ink layouts and no representation. I had spent 4 hours with her that afternoon and hired her by sundown. She said, "You changed my life once. I wanted to tell you that you did it again." Her hand came out of the clutch holding the card. She placed it in my palm gently, as though it were breakable, and closed my fingers over it with both of her hands the way you would close a locket. "I know you don't usually take second meetings," she said. "I know how private your calendar has become since Mrs. Whitfield, so I appreciate the exception more than I can tell you." The card was heavy stock, cream, the kind I had used in the last 2 decades of my working life. On the front, my name, my old title, my private line. On the back, in ink that had faded exactly the way ink fades after 4 decades in a dry cabinet, 5 lines of my own handwriting. And beneath those 5 lines, in a color of ballpoint I had never in my life owned, a cheerful blue scrawl in a hand I had known since it was 6 years old. "Networking for you, Dad. C." I looked at Jasmine and asked, in a voice I did not recognize as my own for its steadiness, when Cameron had given her the card. She said, 2 weeks ago, at the meeting. I asked, what meeting? She said, the one you took with me, the reintroduction. Cameron said your calendar was very tight, but you cleared an afternoon for me. I had not taken any meeting. I did not let the tremor into my voice. 40 years of client rooms had taught me how to keep a face when the ground opens. I said, of course, the afternoon we spent on your foundation work. Tell me how the launch is going. Jasmine's eyes softened, and she began to talk about a nonprofit she had built to train first-generation designers, and about a board seat Cameron had told her I would consider recommending her for. I listened. I nodded at the right times. I noted, without appearing to, that she used the phrase "the package" twice and the phrase "reintroduction fee" once. I asked, gently, if the arrangement had felt fair to her. She laughed. For $85,000 to sit in your living room for an afternoon and be reminded who I was? It was the best money I have ever spent on my own career. $85,000. Wired, presumably, to some entity that had used my name. For a meeting I had not taken, in a living room I had not opened, on an afternoon that had not existed. I told Jasmine I was very pleased for her. I asked her to send my best to her mother, whose name I still remembered. I finished my sparkling water. I did not stay for the second round of speeches. I drove home with a card in my breast pocket that weighed more than the car. I spent 39 years in the advertising business, 22 of them as creative director of a shop that never grew larger than 60 people and never lost a founding client. I did not build monuments. I built rooms, small rooms with the right people in them, on the right accounts, at the right stage of their careers. And then I walked out and let those rooms build the industry. There is a phrase people used to use about me, half joking, at trade dinners. They called me the man who invented the second act, because I had a habit of finding writers and art directors whom someone else had thrown away and giving them the account nobody wanted and watching them win it. Half of the creative directors running major shops today sat across a desk from me before their 30th birthday. I have never listed those names anywhere. Adele kept the ledger for me, in her own hand, in a small black leather-bound binder she titled Gordon's People. She said a mentor who names his own mentees is not a mentor, he is a collector. She was right, and she was, without ever intending to be, the reason the ledger was still recoverable at all, because someone had opened it, and someone had begun selling from it. Adele was an archivist by profession. She spent 34 years cataloging the correspondence of a natural history society, which is to say, she spent 34 years teaching paper how to survive human forgetfulness. She had a museum-grade dye pen that she used to mark the corners of things, cards, letters, photographs, so that if a document were ever moved without permission, the missing edge of color would tell her. She dyed the corner of every card I ever kept from the years before we digitized anything, and the color of that dye was a pale rose she mixed herself, and she taught only me how to see it under the correct angle of lamplight. When she died 2 Aprils ago, I inherited the house, the black leather binder, and the private cabinet in the basement in which the entire paper record of my early career sat behind a lock I had not turned in 11 years. I did not open the cabinet that first summer. I could not stand the smell of the drawer she had lined with cedar. But I could, that night on the drive home from the reunion, remember exactly where the 1987 Ellery card had been filed. And I could remember exactly the rose corner Adele had dyed onto it. And I could feel, before I ever unlocked the door, that the corner would be missing. The house was dark when I pulled into the driveway. Adele had grown climbing hydrangea up the porch pillars in her 50s, and in autumn the leaves turned a color she called old copper, which is to say the color of unread letters. I let myself in through the side door. I did not turn on the front hall light. I went straight to the kitchen, poured a glass of water I did not drink, and sat at the round oak table where she had done the crossword every morning of the last decade of her life. I put Jasmine's card on the table in front of me, blue scrawl side up, and I read the 5 words my son had written across the back of my own handwriting 3 more times. Networking for you, Dad. C. Cameron had always signed things with a period after the initial. He had done it since he was 10 years old. He had done it on a note he left me the morning of Adele's funeral, which read, "I will handle the caterers today. C." It was a small tick I had always found tender. Sitting at the kitchen table that night, I understood for the first time that a small, tender tick can also be a signature, and that a signature, applied to the wrong document, is a confession. I stood and I went to the basement door. The stairs to the basement were the original 1938 timber, and they announced every footfall. Adele and I had never bothered to carpet them. She used to say a good staircase should tell the house who was coming. I let it tell me. At the bottom, I turned right, past her old ceramics wheel and the crate of Christmas ornaments we had bought the year Cameron was 7, and I stopped in front of the walnut cabinet I had built with my father-in-law in the summer of 1974. 3 drawers, brass pulls, a single lock down the front for which there were 2 keys, one on my ring and one in a jewelry box upstairs Adele had left me. The lock was intact. The wood was untouched. Nothing on the surface of the cabinet had been disturbed. That was the first thing that struck me as wrong, because if someone had rifled this cabinet, they had not forced it. They had unlocked it, which meant they had access to a key I had never given anyone. I stood there for perhaps a full minute in the smell of the cedar liner Adele had installed, and then I turned the key in the lock. The mechanism gave with the same soft click it had given for 50 years. I pulled the top drawer open, and I understood, in one glance, what my son had done. The cards were still there, every one of them, so far as a first count could tell. The green section dividers were still in place. The alphabetical tabs were still up. To a casual eye, to Cameron's eye, I would come to understand, the drawer looked untouched. But I had filed those cards one by one over 4 decades, and I knew the physical rhythm of them the way a pianist knows the physical rhythm of his own keys. And the rhythm was wrong. The cards had been thumbed. Their top edges were no longer perfectly aligned the way I always left them. They were nudged forward and back, the way a stranger's hand nudges cards when the stranger is hunting for a particular name. 3 of the alphabetical tabs had been reinserted with the printed side facing the wrong direction. The pale rose corner Adele had dyed onto the 1987 Ellery card was missing entirely. Not smudged, not faded, but scissored cleanly off, so that no one would ever again be able to tell the card from a modern reprint. And in the middle drawer, on the second row, 3 cards were doubled. 2 identical cards, one behind the other, in the file for a man named Holleran. I sat down on the bottom step of the basement stairs, and I began to count what my son had stolen. I was still on the bottom step when I heard tires on the gravel of the drive. Headlights swept across the little basement window at ground level, and I recognized the sound of Cameron's crossover before the engine cut. He had a key to the side door. He let himself in and called out, "Dad, you home? I brought that soup you like from the deli." I did not answer immediately. I stood, I closed the drawer, I locked the cabinet, and I put the key in my inside pocket, and I climbed the stairs at the pace of a man who is a little slower than he used to be. At the top, I opened the basement door with a small wince I did not need to fake, because my knee had been genuine about its opinions for years now, and I stepped into the kitchen where my son was already unpacking a paper sack. "You didn't have to," I said. He kissed me on the top of the head. "Course I did. You were out late tonight. How was the reunion?" "Long," I said. "A great many people I had forgotten I once liked." He laughed, ladling soup into a bowl for me. "Anyone interesting?" he asked. The word interesting was very carefully placed. I let my eyes go slightly vague, and I said, "Some old files must have won." Cameron did not react. This was the moment I understood he had been trained for it, trained by no one but himself over many rehearsed evenings in a mirror I would never see. He set the soup in front of me. He sat down across from me. He said, "What do you mean, wandered? You lose something at the hotel?" "Not at the hotel," I said, and I smiled with the particular small confusion I had watched my own father wear in the last year of his life. A young woman thanked me for a meeting I don't remember taking. She had a card of mine I don't remember giving her. Cameron nodded slowly, the way a man nods when he is deciding which of 3 prepared answers to pick. "Dad," he said gently, "we talked about this. Remember the day we sat down with Dr. Patel? She said this would come in waves." I let a beat pass. I said, "Did we?" He put his hand on top of mine. His hand was warm and dry and steady, and I hated that it was still the hand of the boy I had taught to hold a pencil. "It's okay," he said. "That's why I've been helping you with the archive. That's why the arrangement matters, so no one takes advantage of you." 3 careful questions. I had counted them as they came in. He had asked, first, if I had lost something at the hotel, which was a question meant to locate whether I understood the loss had happened somewhere else. He had asked, second, who the young woman was, which was a question meant to locate whether I could yet name her. He had asked, third, and most gently, whether I remembered the fictional Dr. Patel, which was a question meant to lay the framework of a diagnosis for the next time I said something inconvenient at a dinner. I ate the soup. It was, in fact, the soup I liked. I let him refill the bowl. I let him refill my water. I let him ask me one more time about my knees and whether the community center still tired me out. I said all the correct things. I complimented the bread. I told him a warm story about his mother that I had told him many times before, and I let my hand shake very slightly when I lifted the spoon. He watched the shake. He filed it. When he stood to leave, he laid one of his cards on the counter, a fresh one from a new pocket run, and he said, "I'll come by Sunday. We'll go through the mailbox together." I said, "Thank you, son." I meant a great many things by it. He heard exactly one. I watched his taillights turn out of the drive, and I stood at the front window for a long time after they had gone. Adele had loved this window. It faced east, and in the winter she had drunk her coffee at it and watched the ravens come to the feeder she had fixed to the maple. I could feel her at my shoulder, the way I could feel her at every window in the house. I said aloud, into the empty room, "Adele, our son is stealing from me." The house did not answer. It never did. But saying the sentence out loud was the first act of my rebuilding, because until it was said, the sentence was not a fact. Once it was said, it was a foundation. And I know something about foundations. I had spent 40 years teaching junior copywriters that a campaign is not a slogan on a wall. A campaign is a series of small, unhurried decisions that turn a truth into a movement. I understood, standing at that window, that I would need to run the last campaign of my life against my own son, and that I would need to run it the way I had run every campaign that had ever worked for me, quietly, patiently, in private for a very long time, and in public exactly once. Adele's black leather binder lived in the top drawer of her writing desk in her old office at the back of the house. I had not opened the drawer since the week after her funeral, when I had cleared out her prescription cards and her reading glasses and put them in a shoebox I could not yet throw away. The binder was where she had left it, under a folded silk scarf the color of dried lavender. Its cover was warm to the touch from a west-facing window, and the leather smelled faintly of the oil she had rubbed into it once a year, always in October. I opened it at the kitchen table. Her handwriting greeted me on the first page like a voice I had not heard in a long conversation. "Gordon's People," the title read. Beneath it, in her precise curator's hand, cards issued, cards kept, cards returned, cards refused. Then, over 300 pages, in perfect chronological order, a photograph of every business card I had ever given to a person she felt worth remembering, alongside the date, the room, the recommendation, and the outcome. There is no other private archive like it in the world. There never will be. And on page 71, dated the 3rd of April 1987, I found what I had come looking for. A photograph of Jasmine Ellery's car. Adele had photographed it front and back, as she always did, and beside the photograph she had written in her neat curator's hand, "Kept. Gordon's private set. Do not reissue. Rose corner die applied the 7th of April." The card in the photograph was intact. The rose corner was there. The 5 lines of my own 1987 shorthand were legible, and beside them Adele's small annotation. Shorthand, Gordon retired this system in 1990. I sat with that page open under the kitchen lamp for a long time. Adele had done what Adele always did. She had, in 1987, quietly built the evidence that a fraud committed 4 decades later could be broken open with a single binder. She had not known it, of course. She had only known that paper deserved to survive itself. But her habits of 34 years now became my instruments. I began that night on a legal pad, a list. Down the left column, every card I could remember giving between 1974 and 1991. Down the right column, whether the card was still in the basement drawer, whether its rose corner was intact, and whether the binder confirmed which mentee had received it. By dawn, the list ran to 283 names, and I had counted 41 cards whose rose corners were missing entirely. 41 confirmed thefts. I had not yet begun to count the counterfeit. I gave myself the weekend. I told the veterans at the community center that I had a small procedure on my knee and would be out of session for 2 Saturdays. I unplugged the landline, silenced the mobile, and I sat at the kitchen table with the binder, the drawer, and a fresh box of legal pads. I worked the way Adele had taught me to work, 1 card at a time, 1 column at a time, with a cup of black coffee at my elbow that grew cold and was replaced every 90 minutes. I built 3 lists. List 1, cards physically missing from the drawer entirely. List 2, cards present in the drawer but with the rose corner scissored off. List 3, cards present in the drawer, rose corner intact but with a second identical card duplicated behind them. By Sunday evening, List 1 held 12 names. List 2 held 41. List 3 held 19. 72 cards in my private set had been touched, and I had not yet examined the outer files, the ones I had once let Cameron help me sort in his home office the winter after his mother died. The winter he had insisted, tenderly, that I not do that particular work alone. The winter I had, in the fog of new grief, handed him a key I now understood he had never returned. That winter had a strange gauze around it in my memory, the way winters of grief always do. Cameron had been very present in the first 3 months. He had come by on Tuesdays with dinner. He had driven me to the cardiologist. He had, on a Saturday in February, suggested we begin gently sorting the older client files so that the estate would not one day fall to some unlucky attorney to untangle. He had said the word estate like a young man who had already picked out the wallpaper for a life without me in it, and at the time I had not noticed. I had only been grateful that my son was in the house on a Saturday. We had loaded 2 file boxes into his car. He had promised to bring them back. 3 months had gone by, and then 6. I had asked him once about the boxes in a passing way, and he had told me he had them safe. I had not asked again. That was the season, I understood now, in which the theft had begun. Not in the basement. The basement had come later, but in his own home office, quietly, with the boxes I had trusted him to shelter. And behind that theft, someone had taught him how to convert a card into a wire. I did not yet know that someone's name. I would know it before the week was out. I did not sleep on Sunday night. I sat at the kitchen table until the sky above the maple went from black to the color of skimmed milk, and I made a decision that would set the shape of everything that followed. I could, that morning, have called the county sheriff. I could have called a wire fraud attorney I had once been introduced to at a gala. I could have called Cameron himself, laid the binder on the kitchen table between us, and asked him to explain. I did none of those things. Because a father who calls the sheriff on his son closes a door he will not open again. And because I did not yet know how many other doors were involved. I knew only one thing with certainty. If Cameron had sold Jasmine a meeting for $85,000, then Cameron had almost certainly sold other meetings to other people using other cards. I needed to know how many. I needed to know who. And I needed to know how much, because a fraud without a number is a rumor, and a fraud with a number is a case. So I opened the binder to page 1. I ran my finger down Adele's neat column of names, and I began to make phone calls to the last people in the world I had ever expected to have to ask a hard question. I began with the ones I could still see clearly in my mind. A copywriter I had hired at 23 who now ran a shop in a coastal city. An art director I had talked out of quitting the business in 1981 who now taught graduate design at her university. A creative director I had lent a spare suit for his first pitch in 1979. I did not tell any of them why I was calling. I asked first how they were. I asked after their families. I asked about their work. And then, near the end of each conversation, I asked one careful question. Has anyone from my son's office reached out to you recently? The first two paused a beat too long before they answered. The third said, Gordon, are you asking about the reintroduction program? I said, quietly, yes, I am. She said, I sent Cameron $40,000 in March. I sent him another $60,000 in June. He said it went to the foundation you were setting up in Adele's name. I closed my eyes. I thanked her. I told her nothing else. I moved to the next name. By noon on Monday, I had called 5 people, and 3 of them had wired money to entities they believed were mine. I understood then that I was not going to have to hunt for victims. The victims were going to answer their own phone. The 5th call was the one that showed me the scale. His name was Ford Merriweather, and I had mentored him briefly in the summer of 1982 when he was a 24-year-old strategist too smart for his own agency. He had left advertising for finance a decade later and had become, by every account I had heard, a very quiet man with a very loud portfolio. He answered on the second ring. He said, Gordon, I have been trying to get you on the phone for 6 months. Your son said you were not taking meetings. I said, I am taking this one. There was a small silence. Then he said, I need to tell you something. My fund wired $12 million in April to a vehicle Cameron told us was your founder cluster. He told us you were personally curating the introductions. We have not received a single meeting. We assumed it was the estate lag. Then we started to hear things at industry lunches. $12 million from one man, from one wire, in 1 quarter. I said, Ford, can you send me the wire confirmations, the contract, and every email you have from my son by end of business today to a private address I am about to give you? He said, I can have them to you inside the hour. I gave him the address. I sat down the phone. I sat very still. By Monday evening, the number had begun to form on the back of the last legal pad in a column I had labeled simply, confirmed. Jasmine's $85,000, the $40,000 and the $60,000 from my art director, $110,000 from a copywriter I had loved like a nephew, $2.5 million from a hedge fund partner who believed he had been guaranteed a board seat at a firm that no longer existed, $12 million from Ford. In one afternoon of phone calls, I had confirmed nearly $15 million in wires against my name, and I had only touched the first page of Adele's binder. There are 318 pages in that binder. I understood, sitting at the table under the same lamp Adele had read her novels beneath, that I was looking at a fraud that was going to be measured in tens of millions of dollars and in hundreds of people I had once treated as my own. I understood that the county sheriff was not going to be enough. I understood that a small city attorney was not going to be enough. I understood, most of all, that the reckoning I owed to the people my son had used my name against could not be delivered in an office behind a closed door. It would have to be delivered somewhere they could all watch it happen, and I already had the room. Cameron had, 6 months earlier, joined an industry guild committee I had once chaired for a decade. He had, in the manner of ambitious sons of well-known fathers, allowed the committee to persuade him that a recognition gala for me was overdue. He had told me about it over Sunday dinner in July in a tone of shy pleasure I now understood had been rehearsed. "They want to give you a Lifetime Legacy Award, Dad, 3 weeks after Labor Day. The private club downtown, black tie, 800 people. I'm running the Podium." I had said what any tired widower would say. I had said, "That's very kind of them, but I don't need any of that." Cameron had said, "It isn't about need, Dad. It's about the industry finally saying thank you." I had allowed myself to be persuaded. I had, at the time, been touched. Now, at the kitchen table on the Monday of the phone calls, I opened my calendar and I looked at the date my son had chosen for his own trap. A Saturday, 21 days out. Black tie, 800 people. My son on the podium in front of a ballroom containing the very network he had spent 6 years selling out of a basement drawer. I closed the calendar. I did not smile. But I understood, for the first time since Jasmine had placed the card in my palm, that I was not going to have to build the room. My son had already built it for me. I needed, before that Saturday, 4 things. I needed a forensic accountant who could trace the wires without alerting the bank in a way that would tip Cameron off. I needed a federal officer competent enough to open a parallel inquiry and patient enough to keep it dark for 21 days. I needed a litigation attorney who could draft sworn declarations for every mentee willing to speak, so that when the wire agents finally moved, they moved on a documented foundation, not a hunch. And I needed, at the venue itself, an ally who could quietly secure me the podium sequence I would need to walk into that ballroom and take back my own name. I did not have to look far. My own mentorship tree contained, if Adele's binder was to be believed, 17 forensic accountants, 4 federal agents in wire fraud posts, 31 attorneys of every description, and, I paused when I saw the name, 1 senior curator at the very private club my son had booked for the gala. Nadine Fielder, 1989 intern, now the woman in charge of every event that room hosted. I circled her name. I circled 3 others I remembered specifically for the professions they had grown into. And I made, for the first time in 2 years, a list not of losses, but of instruments. Adele would have called it a call sheet. I called it what she called it, and I began to work. But before any of those calls, I owed one small courtesy to Jasmine. I telephoned her Tuesday morning at 10. I asked her, gently, whether she would be willing to send me, quietly, to a private email address, the wire confirmation, the invoice, and any correspondence she had received from what she believed was my legacy consultancy. I told her the truth in the smallest possible frame. I told her there had been an administrative error on our end, that some meetings had been misfiled, and that I wanted to reconstruct her file personally. She said, "Of course, Mr. Whitfield. I still have everything. My accountant made me keep it." Within an hour, her documents were in my inbox. The invoice was on letterhead I had never seen before. The consultancy address was a downtown mail drop I had never rented. The wiring instructions routed to an account at a bank I had never held money in. And at the bottom of the invoice, in a small serif font I recognized as one Kelsey had used on our Christmas cards for 3 years running, sat the phrase that told me my daughter-in-law had known everything from the beginning. Thank you for investing in the Whitfield network. I forwarded the entire packet to the private address I had already reserved for what was coming next, and then I picked up the phone to call the first of the four. The first name on the call sheet was Terrence Boyd. I had hired him in the summer of 1983 as a junior copywriter with a math degree he had been too embarrassed to mention on his resume. 2 decades later, he had left advertising and become one of the country's quiet specialists in tracing money that did not want to be traced. He answered on the 4th ring, and when he heard my voice, he laughed the small, surprised laugh of a person hearing from an old teacher after a long silence. He said, "Gordon, please tell me you are not calling because someone has finally done something stupid to you." I said, "Terrence, someone has done something extremely intelligent to me over the course of 6 years, and I need you to help me count exactly how intelligent." There was a long, careful pause. Then he said, "How much are we talking about? In the ballpark?" I looked at the number I had already begun to fear. I looked at the binder open under the lamp, at the drawer downstairs with its 72 disturbed cards, at Jasmine's card on the table beside me with the pale ghost where the rose corner had been. I said, "I think we are looking at $47 million. Terrence did not answer for a full breath. And then, very quietly, he said, "Then I hope you already know who did it, because I am going to have to prove it." The obvious path was a phone. I could have picked it up that Tuesday, called the sheriff's office, told a stranger in a uniform what I had learned, and let him drive over in a beige sedan to write things down. I did not pick up the phone. I sat at the kitchen table where Adele used to press her thumb against the rim of her coffee cup and watch the light move across the floor. I thought about my son sliding an envelope across a folding table at the community center in front of my veterans. I thought about the strangers, 340 of them by then, who had wired money into an account with my name stitched to it. And I understood something about the shape of the harm. If a sheriff arrived at Cameron's door on a Tuesday, my son would hire an attorney by Wednesday and go silent by Thursday. The victims would still be victims. The industry would still not know. The lesson would not land. "A quiet arrest is a mercy he has not earned," I said out loud to no one. Adele's chair did not disagree. That was the moment I decided to build the case myself, brick by brick, in a room he thought I could no longer find. I picked up the phone for a different reason. Terrence Boyd had been 19 when I hired him, a scholarship kid from a river town who spelled every color of green with the same word. I taught him to see the difference between viridian and eucalyptus, and he taught me that a good creative desk needs a bad joke every 40 minutes. He left the industry at 30 to become a forensic accountant, which he said was the same job with harder math. I had not called him in 7 years. He answered on the 2nd ring. "Gordon," he said, "you never call before noon. Someone's dying." "Someone will be," I said, "if I do this loudly. That's why I'm calling you quietly." I told him what a card in a young woman's palm had told me. I told him the sum on the invoice. I told him whose signature was at the bottom. He was silent for a long count. Then his voice changed shape. "Send me every wire number you can pull," he said. "Send me the LLC names. Send me nothing over email. Overnight a drive." "You will help me?" I asked. "Gordon," he said, "you gave me a career. This is bookkeeping." I hung up and drove to a shipping counter I had never used before. On the custom slip, I wrote, "Documents, personal, no value." I did not write what they weighed. I mailed the drive from a counter 2 towns over because I did not want the return route to touch my street. On the walk to the car, I turned the moment over and looked at it from a different angle. Cameron knew my patterns. He knew I did not use overnight shipping because Adele had trained me to use the post office. He knew I ordered groceries on Wednesdays. He knew when my knees hurt. The habits I would have to break were not tactical. They were 40 years old, and I would have to break every one that could be tracked. I made a mental list on the drive home. Buy the coffee at a different place. Pay in cash. Leave the phone at the house when I visit the branch. Never speak Terrence's name aloud inside walls Cameron had ever entered. Never write it down on paper Cameron could touch. Say it, when I had to say it, only in cars with the radio on. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror at a stoplight. I looked older than I had that morning. I also looked more decided. Old men are underestimated, I said to my own eyes. Let him underestimate me for 3 more weeks. The light turned green. I did not accelerate quickly. That, too, was a habit I intended to keep. Terrence called me 48 hours later from a landline in a hotel room in a city I did not ask him to name. It's beautiful work, he said, and I could hear that he did not mean it as praise. 3 shell accounts, each in a different jurisdiction, each opened within 4 months of the last. Fee collector at the top, aggregator in the middle, dispersal at the bottom. Where does it end? I asked. It ends, he said, in a real estate holding company that owns 2 rental homes and a condominium at a lake. The holding company is in a woman's maiden name. I already knew. I said her name anyway, quietly, because saying it made it a fact I could not later refuse. Kelsey Voigt, I said. Kelsey Voigt, Terrence confirmed. Registered agent is a paralegal service. The signature on the annual report is hers. I sat very still. My daughter-in-law had brought me a casserole in April and asked me twice if I had considered downsizing. She had done that with the lake condominium sitting under her father's name. Terrence, I said, how much has moved through the metal account in the last 6 weeks alone? He waited. Then he said the number. I wrote it on the back of a grocery receipt because I had nothing else in reach. I did not read it aloud. Angela Barnes had been the first woman on my creative floor in 1984. She was 23 and afraid of no one, including me, and I put her in charge of a beverage account in her 2nd year because she had told a client he was wrong and been right about it. She left advertising in 1996 for law school. She went from there to a federal financial crimes desk. She was now something with a title I could not pronounce inside a building whose acronym I was told not to say out loud. I met her in a diner I picked because it had 4 exits and no windows on the parking lot. She slid into the booth across from me and did not smile. "Gordon," she said, "I got your voicemail. I need you to tell me, before we start, whether you understand that once I open a file, I cannot close it for you." "I understand." "Even if the target is family?" "The target is family." She looked at me for a long second. Then she opened a small leather notebook that she did not put on the table. "Start at the reunion," she said. "Start with the card in the girl's palm." I started at the reunion. She wrote for an hour and asked me exactly 2 questions. The first question Angela asked was the one I had been asking myself for a week. "Why not the state attorney general?" she said. "Why come to us?" "Because it is wire," I said. "Because the wires cross lines. Because the hedge fund is in a different region and the victims are in 19 states. She nodded once. She wrote nothing. Her second question was the one I did not want to answer. "Gordon," she said, "are you asking me for justice or are you asking me for a performance?" I put my coffee cup down. I looked at the pattern of dried sugar on the table. "The evidence will be the same," I said. "The prison time will be the same. The restitution order will be the same. What I am asking is that you let the reveal happen where his crime happened, inside the industry he tried to eat. You want a public arrest. I want an arrest at a specific hour in a specific room with 300 witnesses." She closed her notebook. "I'll open the file," she said. "I'll subpoena the accounts your friend traced. I will not promise you the hour and the room. I'll consider it. If your evidence is what you say it is, I may agree." I paid for both coffees. She let me. Marcus Halloran had been the least talented young writer in my 1982 intake. He was also the most careful listener I ever employed. I moved him out of copy and into contracts after his 4th month, and he built himself a law career out of what I had noticed. He was now the kind of litigation attorney who did not advertise, because his clients found him by referral inside boardrooms. I asked him to my house at 7 in the morning because Cameron did not visit before 10. Marcus sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and did not touch the coffee I set in front of him. "Tell me the injury," he said. Signature by signature, client by client. I did. He wrote in a hand so small I could not read it upside down. When I finished, he put the pen down and looked at me. "Gordon," he said, "I can produce sworn declarations from every mentee willing to speak on their own letterhead, notarized in their own cities, filed the same afternoon. I can also draft one paragraph you will need before any of that." "What paragraph?" "A poison clause," he said, "that goes into whatever document your son next asks you to sign. I have written it before. It has never failed to close a mouth." "Draft it," I said. He nodded and lifted the pen. By Saturday night, Marcus had 39 sworn declarations. He had emailed a template to a small network of attorneys he trusted in 6 cities, each one a former colleague, each one instructed to phrase the invitation as a courtesy interview and nothing more. The mentees I had telephoned did not need to be persuaded. They needed to be given a form and told where to sign. "This one wired 1.1 million, Marcus said, sliding a page across the table. "This one, 85,000. This one, 450. This one, Gordon, look at this. This one was billed 1.8 for a mentoring lunch. My God." "Read the description," I said. He read it. It was in Cameron's marketing voice. I recognized the cadence, the deliberate warmth, the second-person address that Adele had once teased me for teaching him. My son had learned my mouth and put it to work against strangers. I made myself notice the fact and then set it down. "How does this compare," I asked, "to the 12 million hedge fund contract?" "It doesn't compare," Marcus said. "It is dwarfed by it. And there will be more. Terrence will surface them. We are still under a single week of digging." I stood up and looked at the wall. I did not yet know how much more. That was the point of the next 7 days. Cameron did not choose a private moment for the humiliation. He chose the community center on a Thursday morning at 10:15, when I would be at the folding table by the coffee urn helping 3 veterans polish resumes for a warehouse job. He walked in wearing the pale blue shirt I had bought him for his 35th birthday. He was carrying an envelope. "Dad," he said loudly enough that heads turned, "I don't want to interrupt. I just wanted to swing by with this month's stipend. I know how you feel about direct deposit." He set the envelope on the table beside a resume we had just finished. He patted my shoulder. He turned to the men and said with a smile calibrated to be warm, "Gentlemen, if you don't know already, this is our founder emeritus. He was drawing plans on tablecloths when I was in diapers. Take his advice. He deserves the respect." One of the veterans, a man named Hollis, who had spent 9 years in the desert, looked at Cameron and did not smile back. Cameron did not notice. He gave me the small squeeze on the shoulder that we do to elderly relatives at holidays. Then he walked back out into the sunlight. The envelope sat on the table. I did not touch it while the men were watching. Hollis touched the envelope first. He did not open it. He slid it under my elbow with the flat of his palm, the way a man moves live ammunition off a table without comment. "You want us to keep working on the cover letter?" he said. "I want you to keep working on the cover letter," I said. He nodded once. We went back to the resume. I did not open the envelope until after they had all left, at 12 minutes past noon, and I was alone with the last of the coffee. Inside were $200 bills and a small folded card in Cameron's handwriting. "Dad, a little something to make this month easier. Don't spend it all on paint. See." I read the card twice. Then I put it back in the envelope. I did not throw the money away. I drove it to the credit union 3 streets over and deposited it into an account Adele had opened in 2004 for a granddaughter we had never had. The account had $38 in it. It now had $2,038. On the way out, I wrote a note to myself on a deposit slip. Every stipend, every month, every dollar, held in trust for the victims. The teller smiled at me. She did not know why my hand shook. Hollis was waiting for me by his pickup when I stepped out into the parking lot. He was smoking a cigarette. He had told me twice that year he had quit. He waited until I was close enough that he did not have to raise his voice. "Mr. Whitfield," he said. "Yes, Hollis." "That man in the pale blue shirt, my son. That envelope wasn't kindness." I looked at him. He looked at me. He had spent 9 years reading man in bad rooms, and he had read this one across a folding table in 20 seconds. "No," I said, "it wasn't." "You need anything, you tell me." He took a drag on his cigarette. "There's 4 of us in the group who owe you the resume we walked out of here with. There's more than that who owe you the confidence. You say the word. I'm not asking any of you to do anything. I know you're not." He ground the cigarette under his heel. "I'm telling you the word is available. You choose the day." He got into his pickup and drove off. I stood in the sunlight for a moment. I had come to the community center that morning as a widower with a bad Thursday. I was leaving it, quietly, with an army I had not asked for and would not need to raise. Cameron mentioned the gala to me over the phone that night, as if it were an afterthought. "By the way, Dad," he said, "the Industry Guild is doing a recognition gala. 3 weeks Saturday. They want to honor you. I told them yes on your behalf." "Where?" I said. "Downtown. The Old Ballroom, the one with the columns. Formal. 800 people. Kelsey and I already sent out the save the dates. I hope that's all right." "That's all right." "Good. I've been drafting some remarks. I'd like to introduce you. Would that be okay?" "That would be lovely, son." I heard him exhale. I heard him smile. He was pleased. He had built himself a stage. He had invited 800 people. He had told them the theme was gratitude to me. I hung up and walked to the kitchen and marked the Saturday on Adele's paper calendar with a small black dot. I did not circle it. A circle was a thing a distracted man would draw. A dot was a thing a man remembered on his own. 21 days. I looked at the dot for a long time. Somewhere across town, my son was measuring a podium. He did not yet know he was measuring the drop. The next morning I called Marcus. "The gala is set," I said. 21 days. The guild recognition. Cameron's stage, his invitation list, his introduction. Marcus was quiet on the other end. Then he said, "Gordon, I want to be sure I understand. You want to run the reveal from inside his own event. Yes. You understand what that means. If he panics before Saturday, if Kelsey panics, if Preston hears from anyone, if a single mentee we've contacted breaks discipline, if any of the wired victims tries to confront him early, the window closes, the evidence gets moved, the money gets moved, he walks. I understand. Then we set a rule." His voice had gone flat, the way voices go flat when they are about to describe offense. 21 days of nothing. No warnings, no hints, no changes in your routine, no new lawyers, no new phone numbers. You keep going to the community center on Thursdays. You keep taking his envelopes. You keep sounding a little tired. You call Terrence and Angela and me only from the same 3 payphones and only on Sunday afternoons. That's it. That's it. 21 days, Gordon. 21 days, Marcus. I hung up. I looked at the paper calendar. The little black dot was still there. Now it had a countdown around it, drawn in my head. Cameron came for dinner on Sunday. He brought roasted chicken from a place Adele had liked and a leather folder from a briefcase that used to be mine. He waited until I had eaten. Then he cleared his throat and slid the folder across the table. "Dad," he said, "I've been talking with our attorneys. To keep the estate simple, we want to formalize what we've already been doing. A legacy license agreement. It just lets the consultancy continue managing your name and your archive cleanly on your behalf. Nothing changes in day-to-day. It'll make everything easier when, you know." He did not finish the sentence. I looked at the folder. I did not open it. "You've had it drafted?" "Yes, it's straightforward. 15 pages, boilerplate. Our counsel says it protects us both." "May I look it over with someone?" His face did not change, but something in his shoulders did. "Of course, Dad. Take your time. Only, we'd like to have it in place before the gala, if possible. The Guild is going to make a fuss over your legacy. It'd be embarrassing if a reporter asked about licensing and I didn't have paperwork." "I understand." He smiled his warm smile. He believed I would sign it because I always signed what he asked me to sign. He was correct that I would sign it. He was wrong about why. I took the folder to Marcus that Monday morning. He read the 15 pages twice. When he was done, he removed his glasses and set them beside the document. "It is written by a competent attorney," he said. "It grants perpetual, irrevocable, sub-licensable rights to your name, your archive, your signature, and your likeness. It would allow him to release any card, sign any letter, and take any meeting under your identity for the rest of your life and for 70 years after your death." I assumed. "The clause I drafted for you goes on page 11, in the Release of Material subsection. It's 4 sentences. It reads that no card, letter, or archival item may be released under the license without your live video confirmation recorded and time-stamped within 24 hours of the release. It also reads that any release in violation of that clause immediately converts the license into a fraud disclosure and vests all proceeds of that release with the original signatory, which is you. He will read it. He will read it once on page 1. He will not read page 11. He drafted this to be signed, not read. The men who write these do not expect the men who sign them to reach page 11. Marcus put his glasses back on. Sign on his page, initial the page 11 paragraph with a slightly weaker hand. He will not check. Cameron came at 7 on Tuesday evening, precisely when he had said he would. He had brought Kelsey with him this time. She wore a beige cardigan and the pearl earrings her mother had given her the year she married my son. She sat on my left and refilled my water glass twice before I had drunk from it once. Cameron opened the folder and turned pages for me with the care of a man showing his father a photograph album. "Right here, Dad," he said. "That's the signature line. Small line above for the date." "Would you like me to read it?" I asked. He hesitated. Then he smiled. "I've read it. Marcus," he did not know that name was mine, "our attorney has read it. It's the standard document. Really, it's just a formality." Kelsey squeezed my forearm. "We just want to protect you, Dad," she said. Her hand was cool and small. I signed on the line Cameron pointed to. I dated it. I turned the pages with my slightly slower fingers. On page 11, I initialed the paragraph he had not read. I turned the last page. I set the pen down. Cameron let out a breath he did not know he had been holding. Kelsey kissed the top of my head. They took the folder. They took the pen. They did not take the copy Marcus had already digitally sealed at 9 that morning. The next morning, I went down to the basement and opened the cabinet Adele had built into the wall behind the paint racks. Not the cabinet Cameron had rifled, the other one, the one Adele kept for her museum conservation supplies, the one my son had never asked about because it did not look like a cabinet. Inside, on the third shelf, was a small brown bottle of ultraviolet reactive marking dye she had used to authenticate loan objects for a regional history museum in 1998. The dye was invisible to the eye and unfaded 30 years later under a handheld lamp. I took the bottle upstairs. I selected 3 business cards from my genuine private set, none of them ever released, all of them from 1985, 1986, and 1988, all of them from clients now dead. I photographed each one from 4 angles. I logged each one in a spiral notebook with the date and the die mark placement. Then I painted a small crescent moon on the back lower corner of each card, invisible in daylight, glowing pale green under the lamp. I sealed the cards in an envelope Adele had once used for archival transport. On the envelope I wrote, in my own hand, "For Cameron, my last 3, The ones I forgot to give you. I set the envelope beside my reading chair. I waited for him to visit. Cameron came on Friday. He came alone. He kissed the top of my head and asked me how the veterans were. I told him one had gotten an interview for the warehouse job. He nodded distractedly and asked whether I needed anything from the store. I let a silence sit. Then I said, as if I had only just remembered, "Oh, son, I found something. In the drawer. I thought you might want them. For the consultancy. It's just 3 old cards. I've been forgetting to bring them up." I gestured toward the envelope beside my chair. He was on his feet before I had finished the sentence. "Dad, really? They're from clients who are gone now. I don't know what use they'd be. But you keep saying the archive matters. Maybe they'll matter." He picked up the envelope. He opened it in front of me. He fanned the 3 cards on his palm, and his lips parted, and I saw a look pass over my son's face that I had never before seen in my own house. Hunger. Naked, unmediated hunger. "Dad," he breathed, These are perfect. Thank you." He kissed me again on the top of the head. He left with the envelope. I heard his car door close in the driveway. I heard him laugh once before the engine started. I drove to the payphone behind the supermarket that Sunday afternoon and called Angela. I did not use her name. She did not use mine. "He took the 3, I said. "Marked?" "Marked. I have the photograph log and the die batch." "Good. Terrence has been watching. 2 of the 3 cards were on his prospect calls within 48 hours. "Which 2? "The 1985 and the 1988. He offered the 1985 to a private equity partner for $200,000. The 1988 to a real estate developer for $175. Both wired. In real time? In real time. My team was mirroring his client video conferences by then. We have his face, his voice, his pitch, the wire instructions on screen behind him, and the recipient account routing." I let a small breath out. It was not quite a laugh. It was closer to the sound a man makes when a load he has been carrying for weeks shifts, just once, and finds a more balanced way to sit on his shoulders. "The 3rd card?" I asked. "The 1986. He's holding it. He said on the last call it was for a special client." "The hedge fund?" "Almost certainly the hedge fund. Gordon, the pattern is now on video. The archive breach is documented. The wires are captured. The identity fraud is on his face in his own home. How much do you have him for now?" She paused. Then she told me the number in a voice so leveled it was almost tender. $22.6 million in fully documented wire fraud, Gordon, traced end to end. Recipient accounts identified, victims interviewed, signed declarations attached. That's what we can prove today. That's not the ceiling. Terrence keeps finding more. I held the receiver against my ear for a long moment. $22.6 million. Only 3 weeks ago, a young woman had pressed a card into my palm at a hotel cocktail hour, and I had almost dropped it. Now a federal agent was reading me a figure over a payphone that would put my son in a prison cell for the rest of his working life. "Angela," I said. "Yes, the gala is possible. My superiors have signed off on the operational plan, contingent on the reveal happening exactly as we've discussed. No deviations. If your son delivers his introduction as planned, we move in under cover of the standing ovation. You'll be there. I'll be there. I'll be in the 5th row in a black cocktail dress, seated beside a man you will not recognize, who is also mine. There will be 12 of us in the room. You will not see us until we move." "Understood. Gordon." "Yes, 13 days. 13 days, I said. She hung up. I did not. I still needed one more ally, and Marcus had already told me her name. Nadine Fielder had been a shy junior art director in 1989, so anxious she once threw up before a client presentation. And I had walked her back to her desk and told her that anyone who cared enough to be sick was going to be excellent, given time. She was now the senior curator of a private club, the same club whose Old Ballroom was hosting my gala. I met her on a Wednesday afternoon in the empty room itself. Chandeliers hung dark. Round tables stood without linens. She was small and gray and radiated authority. "Mr. Whitfield," she said, "I heard the theme was your legacy. The theme is going to change slightly on the night of." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she smiled the smile of a woman who had spent a career waiting for the right instruction. "Tell me what you need." I need the podium under my control from the moment I step to it. I need the microphone unable to be cut. I need the projector able to run a file I will hand you an hour before doors. I need backstage access for 4 people whose names Angela will provide. I need the doors to lock from the outside at 9:45. She nodded once. "Consider it done." Cameron asked that Friday night if he could rehearse his introduction speech in my living room. He said he wanted to make sure the tone was right. He said he wanted to hear it in the space where he had grown up. I told him to come at 8 and I would sit in Adele's chair and listen. He came at 8. He wore a rehearsal jacket, not the tuxedo, and he stood in front of my fireplace with a small stack of index cards. He cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen of the Guild," he began, "we are gathered tonight to honor a man whose name has been quietly written into the margin of every good idea this industry has produced for 40 years. I listened. He was, I have to admit, a beautiful speaker. He had inherited that from me. He talked about the mentees I had raised. He named 7 by name. 3 of the 7 were on Marcus's sworn declaration list. I let no muscle in my face move. He talked about the archive, about the discipline of a father, about the woman who had loved that father. He mentioned Adele. My hands did not tighten. When he finished, he asked me if the pacing was right. "The pacing is perfect," I said. He beamed. He did not know that in 7 days he would deliver every word of that speech, and that when he was done, I would walk to the microphone. After he left, I sat in Adele's chair for a long time. I turned Cameron's rehearsal over in my mind and found what I had been listening for. He had, without knowing it, laid out the full sequence I needed. He would open with a joke about my terrible tie choices in the 1970s. He would move to the 7 names. He would then invite me to the podium with an outstretched arm and step aside. He would remain on the stage, to my left, so that photographers could catch the 2 of us together for the industry press. He would expect me to speak for 6 or 7 minutes about gratitude. He would expect me to end with a joke of my own. He would expect applause. He would expect a receiving line. He had built the entire choreography for me. He had left me a stage, a microphone, a captive room of 800, and himself standing 3 feet from my elbow with his face turned toward the audience for photographs. I called Nadine on the payphone that night. 12 minutes at the microphone, I told her, not 7. And the projector cued to my file at the moment I say the word ledger. She wrote it down. Then she said, "Mr. Whitfield, are you sleeping?" "I'm sleeping fine, Nadine." "Good," she said. "Sleep more." On the second Monday of the countdown, I drove to the branch where Adele had kept her archive box and took a second, larger box in my own name. Into it, I placed 1 copy of the sworn declarations Marcus had gathered, by then 57 of them. 1 copy of Terrence's wire flow diagram with the shell accounts named. 1 copy of the annotated 1987 card Jasmine had pressed into my palm. 1 copy of the Poison Pill Legacy License Agreement with the initialed page 11. 1 copy of the die photograph log for the 3 baited cards. 1 copy of a letter, in my own hand, addressed to no one, describing what would happen at the gala and why. And 1 photograph of Adele I had not looked at in 2 years. Adele at 40, in a blue dress, laughing at something a client had said, her hand raised as if to swat the joke away. I closed the box. I turned the key. I walked out into the sunlight of a Monday afternoon 11 days before the gala. I sat in the car for a moment before starting it. I thought of the number Angela had told me on the payphone, and the number Cameron did not know I was carrying, and the number of witnesses he had personally invited into a room that would soon lock from the outside. Then I drove home. Marcus had convened the encrypted conference call for a Wednesday night, 10 days out from the gala. 14 of my former mentees were on it. Jasmine was on it. Terrence was on it. 3 of the 14 were senior enough, a network president, a global chief creative officer, a private equity founder, to end my son's career with a single phone call apiece. I asked all 14 to hold their fire. I am asking you, I said, to be patient with me for 10 more days. I know what this has cost each of you. I know some of you have written checks that will not come back for a long time. I am asking you to trust that the room I have chosen for this reckoning is the room in which it will land hardest. I am asking you to bring 2 cards each to the gala, the one I gave you long ago and the one my son sold you. There was a silence on the line. Then the private equity founder, whose name I will not put on paper here, cleared his throat. "Gordon," he said, "you gave me my first campaign in 1985. You gave me the second, third, and fifth. I have waited 39 years to owe you something. I will bring both cards. I will stand when you tell me to stand." One by one, 13 more voices said the same. I hung up the phone. Adele's chair was empty across the living room, as it had been for 2 years, and I sat there anyway and looked at it. 9 days. That was all that remained between the man I had been for 71 years and the man I would be on a Saturday night in the Old Ballroom downtown. The evidence was cataloged. The victims were counted. The allies were placed. The document was signed and rigged. The bait was taken. The video was captured. The room was chosen. The doors would lock at 9:45. 14 mentees had promised to rise. 12 federal agents would move under cover of an ovation. A hedge fund partner Cameron had never met would testify on a screen behind my shoulder. A woman named Nadine would run the projector. A woman named Angela would sit in the 5th row in a black dress. A young art director named Jasmine would hold the card that started it. My son was in his own kitchen tonight, in a house I had helped him buy, showing his wife the guest list, laughing at his father's tie choices in 1974. I said quietly into the empty room, "Adele, it's almost done." The chair did not answer, but I could feel her, one hand on the back of it, patient, waiting to see what the man she had married would do. 9 days. That is what the calendar on my kitchen wall reduced the world to. 9 boxes to cross off before 800 people gathered in a ballroom my son believed he had built for himself. I woke that morning at 5, made coffee in the chipped mug Adele had rescued from a yard sale in 1983, and sat at the table with 3 folders in front of me. One held the mentee list. One held the invoice reconciliations Terrence had wired me overnight. One held a single sheet of paper with a phone number written in Marcus's careful hand and one word beside it, underlined twice, "Ready." I did not open it. I looked at it the way a man looks at a loaded shotgun on a mantel, not with fear, but with respect for what it would do when I asked. Somewhere across town, my son was rehearsing his gala speech in front of a bathroom mirror, believing he was about to be crowned. I sipped the coffee. It had gone lukewarm without me noticing. Outside, a delivery truck rolled past, and its headlights swept the kitchen wall, illuminating for 1 second the photograph of Adele at her archivist's desk in 1996. She was looking straight at me. I understood then what she wanted me to do next. Terrence called at 7:14. He never said hello. "Gordon, I need you to sit down." I was already sitting. He said it anyway. The $12 million from the hedge fund did not go through one shell. It went through 3, and the third shell wired $1.1 million out to a title company in a coastal state 2 days later. A house was purchased, cash, deed recorded under Kelsey's maiden name. He paused. "The house has a boat slip." I set the mug down. The number moved in my head from abstract to physical. A boat slip. A cash-purchased house with a deck for a boat that had not been bought yet but soon would be. My son and his wife were shopping for water. Terrence, I said, how confident are you that this closes? There was a long silence on his end that I understood as a professional man refusing to bluff. Then he said, if Angela's team gets the wiring records subpoenaed before Saturday, it is a federal case with photographs. If they do not, it is still a federal case, but the photographs come later. Either way, you are not the one who has to worry. I thanked him and hung up. Then I stood at the window and watched the sun come over the eaves, and I thought about a boat slip that would never see a boat. I went down to the basement at 8 and unlocked the second cabinet, the one Cameron had never asked about because he did not know it existed. Adele had built it into the wall the summer of 2011 behind a false panel she disguised as a fuse box. Inside was a single fire-rated envelope. I lifted it out and carried it upstairs. Inside the envelope was every one of the humiliations Cameron had ever inflicted on me and thought I had forgotten. The stipend envelope from the community center, empty now, but the paper still smelled faintly of the cologne he wore that day. A photocopy of the legacy license agreement he had slid across the kitchen table, my signature careful and cooperative at the bottom, and, invisible unless one looked for it, Marcus's clause tucked into the third page. And a single Polaroid Adele had taken in 1989 of Cameron at 8 years old, holding one of my business cards up to the camera and grinning. She had written on the white border in her looping hand, "He thinks it means daddy." I sat with the envelope for a long minute. Then I picked up the phone and dialed a number I had not called in 6 years. The line rang twice before a woman's voice answered. She said my name before I said hers. Her name was Vivian Reyes. She had been a copywriter I mentored in 1984, and she had gone on to run the ethics review board for a major creative guild, the same guild that, coincidentally, would be hosting Saturday's gala under a different naming sponsor. I had not called her in 6 years because she had made it clear, kindly but firmly, that her position required her to hold professional distance from anyone she had once trained. She had answered anyway. "Gordon." Her voice was warm and careful. "I have been waiting for you to call." I asked her what she meant. She said, "2 of your former mentees phoned me 3 months ago about invoices they did not understand. I did not know what to do with the information. I filed it. I am ashamed I filed it." I told her I did not blame her. I told her what I was doing on Saturday. There was a long, considered silence. Then she said, "How many rise?" I told her 14. "It should be more," she said. "Give me until noon tomorrow and I will make it more." I asked her not to. I told her 14 was enough. 14 was the number Adele would have wanted, because 14 was the number of first-year mentees Adele had personally photographed for me in 1987, the year the shorthand began. Kelsey came by that afternoon. She had never come by unaccompanied. Cameron was at the club, she said, meeting the gala production coordinator to walk the room. She wanted to talk to me about something important. She sat at the kitchen table with her hands folded and said, "Gordon, I need you to know I love your son." I said I knew. She said, "I also need you to know that some of the decisions he has made, some of the business decisions, were made without me." I let the silence sit. She did not fill it right away. She was better trained than Cameron. She waited. When I did not speak, she said, "If anything ever came to light, I would want you to know that I did not always agree." I studied her face. It was the face of a woman writing a script she wanted delivered later. She was setting up an alibi in my kitchen and asking me to notarize it. I said, "Kelsey, would you like some tea?" She said no. She said she should go. She stood, and at the door she turned and said, "You have always been good to me, Gordon." I said, "That is because Adele would have wanted me to be." She flinched very slightly. I closed the door and watched through the curtain as she sat in her car for 4 full minutes before she drove away. I called Angela within the hour. I described the conversation word for word. Angela listened without interrupting, which was one of the things that made her formidable. When I finished, she said, "Gordon, she is not just building an exit ramp. She is asking you to help her pave it." I said, "I gathered that." Angela said, "Do not respond to her again before Saturday. Do not confirm what she said, and do not deny it. If she reaches out, redirect through Marcus. If Cameron notices any change in her behavior, he will change his own, and I do not want him changing his behavior between now and Saturday morning." I said I understood. Then I asked her the question I had been avoiding. "Angela, on the scale of what your division sees, how large is this one?" She paused. "Top decile for the year. If we get the boat slip house before he can sell it, top quartile of the decade." I sat with that number for a long time after we hung up. Somewhere across the city, my son believed he was inheriting my name. He did not yet know that my name had been quietly copywriting itself for 6 years, and that the copyright registrar had shown up at the door in the person of a woman I had trained 40 years ago. At 6:15, my phone chimed. A text from Cameron. "Dad, guess what? We upgraded the ballroom to the atrium. 900 confirmed. You will love it. Love you." I read it twice. I looked at the words, "You will love it," and felt something cold and steady move through my chest. He had upsized the room. He had gone from 800 to 900. He was, without knowing it, adding 100 more witnesses to his own arrest. I set the phone down. I picked up a pen and wrote in my daybook, 9/13, atrium, 900, 9 days. Then I underlined the word atrium and drew a small square beside it, not because I needed to remember it, because I wanted to see in my own handwriting the size of the room my son had chosen for himself. I got up, walked to the kitchen, and poured myself 2 fingers of the whiskey Adele had bought me for our 30th. It had been sitting in the cabinet almost untouched for 11 years. I raised the glass to her photograph on the sideboard. I said her name out loud. Then I took the smallest sip and set it down, because I needed my head absolutely clear for what came next. What came next was a phone call I did not want to make. The call was to Jasmine Ellery. I had not spoken to her since the reunion. I had waited on purpose. If Cameron was watching my phone records, and I had to assume he was, a second call to her too soon would fit a pattern. 6 days felt right. 6 days felt like a grandfather losing his train of thought and dialing back to apologize for it. She picked up on the first ring. "Gordon?" "Jasmine, I owe you a proper conversation." She said, "I have been sick every day since I gave you that card." I told her she had done exactly the right thing. She said, "How large is it, Gordon, truly?" I told her, 47 million, 340 victims. The line went quiet. Then she said very softly, "So I was one of the small ones." I said, "No, you were the one that mattered. You were the one who walked across the room." She began to cry then, quietly, the way a professional woman cries when she is trying not to be heard by anyone in her open plan office. She said, "Tell me what to do on Saturday." I told her. I told her exactly. She listened without a word, and when I finished, she said, "I will be there. I will bring both cards. I will not tremble." I believed her. And then I asked her one more thing, and she said yes to that too. What I asked Jasmine to bring was a photograph. In 1987, 3 weeks after I hired her, Adele had taken a black and white picture of the two of us at the drafting table in my old office. Jasmine was leaning over a proof, laughing at something I had just said. I was pointing at a headline with my pen. Adele had given a copy to Jasmine at the door on the way out, and Jasmine had, remarkably, kept it. She still had it framed in her home office. I asked her to bring the frame to Saturday. Not to hold it up at the podium, not to display it, simply to have it in her handbag when she rose. She asked me why. I told her the truth. Because Adele is going to be in that room whether Cameron invited her or not, and I would like her to be visible to at least one person besides me. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Gordon, I have kept that photograph on my desk for 38 years. I did not know that. I sat with the phone against my ear and I did not know what to say. She said, "I will bring the frame." Then she said something I had not expected. She said, "Adele used to send me a birthday card every year until she died. I did not know how to tell you that." I hung up the phone and I sat at the kitchen table for an hour without moving. Adele had been sending my mentees birthday cards for decades without telling me. I got up and I went to her writing desk in the back room, the desk I had barely opened since the funeral, and I pulled out the bottom drawer. Inside was a leather-bound ledger. On the first page, in her handwriting, was a title, Gordon's People, Birthdays. I turned the pages slowly. 283 names. Beside each, a date. Beside each date, a small pencil mark for every year she had sent a card. Some names had 32 marks, some had 15. Some had 3 because Adele had only met them shortly before she got sick. I closed the ledger and I put my hand flat on its cover and I breathed. Cameron had thought he was selling my network. He had never understood. He had never bothered to understand that the network was not mine. It was hers. She had been quietly, patiently, invisibly holding it together for 4 decades while I got the credit at industry lunches. And now she was going to be the one who ended it. I picked up the ledger. I carried it upstairs. I placed it in the fire-rated envelope beside the Polaroid, and I locked the envelope in the second cabinet. The next morning, Nadine Fielder called from the club at 10:30. Her voice was low and quick. "Gordon, he came in yesterday afternoon for a second walkthrough. He brought Preston." I stopped what I was doing. "Preston came to the club?" Preston came to the club. He walked the atrium with Cameron. He asked the production coordinator about camera angles from the mezzanine. He asked which side entrance had the least lobby traffic. He asked whether the freight elevator ran during the event. I felt something tighten under my ribs. "Nadine, what did he say when he asked those questions?" "He said he was reviewing security for the family. He said your son wanted to make sure Dad had a private way out if he got overwhelmed by the crowd." I understood then what I was looking at. It was not a security review. It was an evacuation plan. If anything went wrong on Saturday, if any part of the evening turned against them, Preston Alderman had mapped the exact route by which he intended to disappear into the night. I asked Nadine, "Can you get me a copy of the ballroom security camera schedule? All cameras, all angles, all timestamps." She said, "I already pulled it. It is in an envelope at the front desk under a false name for you to collect." I asked what name. She said, "Adele Whitfield." I laughed once, sharply into the phone. Then I got in the car. I drove downtown. I parked 2 blocks away and walked. The club's front desk was staffed by a young man in a black vest who I had never met. I gave him the name. He handed me a manila envelope without a flicker of curiosity. I tucked it under my arm and walked back to the car and did not open it until I was 3 miles away, parked at a curb in a residential neighborhood where no one knew me. Inside the envelope was a floor plan of the atrium annotated in Nadine's tight curatorial script. Every camera was numbered. Every angle of coverage was shaded. 2 entrances were circled in red, the freight bay off the loading dock and a service stair that descended from the mezzanine to a valet driveway. Beside each red circle, Nadine had written a single word, blind. Not because the cameras did not exist, but because those 2 feeds were routed to a separate server on a maintenance rotation. She had also drawn a small arrow to a third door and written, "Not blind. This one records to the cloud." I studied the plan. I understood what she had given me. She had given me the ability to steer Preston toward the door that would remember him. I refolded the plan. I drove home. I called Angela. I read her the numbers. She said one word, beautiful. Angela called back at 6. Her voice had a new register in it, the register of a federal agent who has stopped consulting and started deciding. "Gordon, listen, I am bringing this in-house on my badge. As of tonight, the operation runs out of my office. 2 additional agents are read in. One of them is a wire specialist named Cortez. The other is a surveillance lead named Whitman. You will meet neither before Saturday. You will not need to. I said I understood. Second thing, the boat slip house is under a records request tonight. If it moves before Saturday, we will know within an hour and we adjust. It has not moved yet. I said good. Third thing, Kelsey. She is going to reach out again. Do not answer. If she leaves a message, forward it to Marcus. Marcus will forward it to me. We are building a record of her attempts to preposition, and every attempt makes her cooperator agreement worth less to her and more to us. I said I understood. Then Angela paused. Fourth thing, I waited. Preston flew to a Caribbean island last Tuesday for 6 hours and flew back. He did not stay overnight. He met with one attorney. We have the attorney's name. He is a specialist in extradition treaties. The line was quiet for a long moment. Then Angela said, he knows something is coming. He does not yet know what, and he is losing his nerve. I hung up and I stood at the window and I watched the streetlight come on outside. Preston Alderman was losing his nerve. That was not a good thing. That was, in fact, the most dangerous thing that had happened in 6 weeks. A steady criminal was predictable. A nervous criminal was a man who might do something rash before Saturday. Sell the boat slip house at a loss, move a wire, warn Cameron, or simply vanish. I called Marcus. He answered on the second ring. Marcus, Preston is spooked. What do we have that will keep him in country for 9 more days? There was a pause on the line while Marcus, in his methodical way, ran through the case file in his head. One thing, he said, he has a client meeting on Wednesday that he cannot cancel. A $12 million wire he has been building for 4 months. If he misses that meeting, he loses the wire. If he loses the wire, he loses the down payment he has already put on the extradition attorney's retainer. I understood. Preston was, in his own way, changed by his own greed. He could not run before Wednesday because he had not yet been paid enough to run comfortably. I said, Marcus, can we make sure the client meeting happen on schedule and the wire clears? Marcus paused. Then he said, Angela can. She would love to. The morning, I went to the community center. It was Thursday. I had not been in a week. I had told them I had a cold. When I walked in at 10, 4 of my regulars were at the long table with their resumes spread out. They looked up. The one closest to the door, Ray, a man of 68 who had spent 31 years driving a delivery truck for a regional bakery, said, Boss, you look thin. I told him I had lost some sleep. I sat down. I picked up his resume. I fixed a bullet point. Then I set the pen down and I looked at all 4 of them, and I said what I had come to say. Gentlemen, something is going to be in the news next week. It will involve my family name. I want you to hear it from me first. They stopped moving. Ray put his coffee cup down. I told them in the simplest words I had that my son had been stealing my professional reputation for 6 years and that on Saturday it would come to an end. I did not use any of the numbers. I did not name Kelsey or Preston. I told them the ending would be public and it would be permanent, and that I did not want them reading about it in the paper and wondering whether I was ashamed to face them. Ray was the first to speak. Gordon, you have been fixing our resumes for 2 years. Do you think we did not notice you never talked about your own son? I did not have an answer for that. He said, the last time you mentioned him was in the spring. You said he had helped you with the taxes. Your face went sideways when you said it. You changed the subject to the coffee. I sat with that. We are old men, Gordon. We drove trucks. We stood in kitchens. We stocked shelves. We know when something is wrong. We did not press because you did not want us to press, but we saw it. Then Ray leaned back and folded his arms and said, do we need to be there Saturday? I told him no. He said, Do we need to not be there? I told him no again. He nodded once. Then he said, then we will watch it on the television when they show it. And on Monday morning at 10, we will be right here at this table with our resumes, and you will too. Yes? I could not speak. I nodded. He said, good. Now sit down and fix Miguel's cover letter, because he has been staring at that first paragraph for 40 minutes and it has not improved. I laughed, and the sound cracked a little on the way out, and then I sat down and I fixed the cover letter. Friday morning, a courier arrived at my door with a package I had not ordered. I signed for it. I closed the door. I opened it in the front hall. Inside was a boxed presentation copy of the Industry Guild Recognition Gala program, printed on heavy cream paper with gold leaf edging. On the cover was my photograph, the one from my 71st birthday, taken by Cameron at a restaurant, in which I was smiling with my eyes not quite reaching the camera. Under the photograph, in raised type, were the words, "In honor of Gordon Whitfield, a lifetime of building the room." I turned to the first page. Cameron's speech was printed there in full, 1,200 words. I read them standing in the hallway. It was, I had to admit, a well-written speech. He praised my patience with young talent. He praised Adele's memory in a paragraph that made careful use of the word grace. He described me as a quiet architect and used the phrase, the network that raised the industry. At the bottom of the last page, he had written by hand in blue ink, Dad. I hope this comes as close as words can. I love you. Cam. I stood in the hallway for a long time holding that program. Then I walked to the kitchen and I placed it, face up, on the calendar under the square marked 9:13. At 2 that afternoon, I went upstairs to the bedroom, sat in the chair by the window, and rehearsed the sentence I would say when I yielded the podium. Marcus had drafted 3 options. Angela had approved a 4th. Nadine had suggested a 5th. I had thrown out all 5. What I would say when the moment came was the sentence that had been forming in my head since the night I first opened the fire-rated envelope. I said it out loud to the empty room. Before I accept this honor, I would like to invite 14 people in this room to rise and speak on my behalf, because they know better than anyone in this ballroom what my career actually was. I said it 3 times. On the 3rd pass, I heard the way it would land. Quiet, even, not accusatory, just courteous. The word courteous mattered. Cameron would hear it as a grandfather's fond deflection. The room would hear it as a request. The 14 would hear it as the signal. And by the time Cameron understood what he was hearing, 14 former mentees would already be on their feet in a ballroom of 900, with 2 cards in each of their hands. I stood up. I walked to the closet. I opened it. I looked at the midnight blue suit hanging in its garment bag, untouched since the funeral. I did not take it out yet. Not yet. At 4:30, my phone rang. I did not answer. I let it go to voicemail. Then I sat at the kitchen table and I played the message back. Kelsey's voice. She was in her car. I could hear the road noise. Gordon, I know you are probably busy. I just wanted to say I have been thinking a lot about our conversation yesterday, and I want to make sure you understood what I was trying to tell you. Cameron loves you very much. Whatever comes, please remember that. And please, please remember that I have always been on your side, even when it did not look like it, even when I could not say so out loud. I love you, Gordon. Have a good weekend. I will see you Saturday. The message ended. I sat with it for a full minute. Then I picked up the phone and I forwarded the recording to Marcus, exactly as Angela had instructed. Marcus called back within 11 minutes. His voice was flat. Gordon, that is what we call the pre-cooperation confession. She has now, on a recorded voicemail, admitted that there is something coming, admitted that she has been positioning herself for it, and asked you to remember her behavior favorably. It is beautiful. Save the phone. Do not delete it. Do not answer if she calls again. I did not answer when she called again at 8:15. I did not answer when she called at 10:22. 2 in the morning, Friday into Saturday. I was awake. I had not slept more than an hour. I sat downstairs in the dark in Adele's armchair by the window, and for the first time in 6 weeks, I let the question in. What if I was wrong? What if the 14 did not rise? What if only 12 rose? What if only 8? What if Cameron, when he saw the first one stand, understood in a single instant what was happening and turned to the microphone and said something disarming, something charming, something that made the room laugh, something that turned the 14 from witnesses into an awkward interruption at a nice man's tribute? What if the federal agents, delayed by traffic or by paperwork or by some bureaucratic hiccup I couldn't foresee, arrived late, arrived after the ovation had died and Cameron had left the stage and the moment had passed? What if Preston, sensing the room shift, made for the freight bay and vanished into the loading dock before Nadine could steer him? What if the whole thing came apart in front of 900 witnesses, and I was left standing on a podium in Adele's midnight blue suit with 14 humiliated friends and a name my son had made a punchline of? I sat with the question. I let it walk around me in the dark. And then, because Adele's chair had always been the place where clarity came, it came. Clarity came in the form of a memory. 1992. Adele was in this same chair, reading a book, and I had come home from work with a story about a client meeting that had gone badly. I had lost an account. 2 years of relationship, gone in an afternoon. I had told her, sitting on the ottoman at her feet, that I had failed, that I had let the room down, that I had misjudged the moment. She had put the book down. She had looked at me for a long time. Then she had said, "Gordon, you did not fail. You were outnumbered. There is a difference. And the difference is that when you are outnumbered, the answer is not to work harder next time. The answer is to bring more people into the room." She had gone back to her book. That was the whole conversation. I had never forgotten it. I sat in her chair at 2 in the morning 35 years later, and I understood for the first time what she had really been telling me. She had been telling me that I had already been bringing people into the room for 20 years, one mentee at a time, without noticing I was doing it. She had been telling me, with a mother's patience, that the room I was building was going to save me one day. I stood up from the chair. I went upstairs. I slept. Saturday morning at 7, I woke calm. I made coffee. I ate 2 slices of toast. I read the paper for 20 minutes because I did not want to spend the day thinking. At 8:30, the phone rang. It was Angela. "Gordon, status check. The wire from Wednesday cleared. Preston is in country. He is at his apartment. He is dressed. He is coming to the gala. Cameron is at the hotel already, running through the sound check. Kelsey is at the salon. Terrence has the wire files packaged for tonight. Marcus has the sworn declarations printed. Nadine has your backstage credential taped under the seat of the last chair in the 3rd row of the mezzanine, because she anticipates that Cameron will want to sit you at the head table, but she wants a backup route if he changes seating." I said, "Angela, what time will you arrive?" She said, "I will be in position outside the freight bay at 7:45. Cortez covers the mezzanine service stair. Whitman covers the cloud-recorded lobby exit. 12 agents in the room in evening dress. You will not recognize any of them." I said, "How will I know when the moment is safe?" She said, "You will feel it. But if you need a signal, look at Nadine. If she nods once, we are ready. If she shakes her head, hold." I hung up. I sat at the kitchen table with the empty toast plate, and I said Adele's name once, out loud, to the empty room. At noon, Cameron came by. He was in gray slacks and a white shirt, no tie yet. He looked good. He looked, in fact, like a man on the morning of the day he expects to be crowned. He kissed the top of my head, something he had not done since he was 12, and said, "Dad, just wanted to check in. You okay?" I told him I was fine. He said, "You know you do not have to speak long, right? Just accept the award. Say thank you. Let me do the heavy lifting." I said I understood. He said, "You look tired." I said I had not slept well. He said, "Take a nap, please. I want you fresh." Then he sat down across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where he had slid the legacy license agreement, the same table where he had handed me the stipend envelope in front of the veterans. And he said, "Dad, I know this year has been hard. Losing Mom, then all this, the legacy work. I know I have been pushing. I want you to know that everything I have done for you." I looked at him. I looked at my son. I said, "I know, Cameron. I know exactly what you have done for me." He smiled. He did not hear the sentence. He heard the tone. He kissed my head again. He left. At 4, I went upstairs. I opened the closet. I took the garment bag down. I laid it on the bed. I unzipped it. The midnight blue suit was still there. The color Adele had chosen because she said it made my eyes look calm. I laid it out. The white shirt. The silver cufflinks she had given me for our 35th. The tie she had bought me in a boutique on a trip to a coastal town in the late 90s, a deep pewter silk with a barely visible pattern of interlocking rings. I dressed slowly. I dressed the way a man dresses for a wedding or a burial, which are the only two occasions that require a man to think about the fact of his own body. When I was done, I stood in front of the mirror. The suit still fit. Adele had insisted on a cut with room in the shoulders, and my shoulders had not changed. My face had. There was more gray in the beard. The eyes were tired, but they were level. I turned to leave, and then I stopped, and I went to the bedside table, and I opened the drawer, and I took out the small silver ring Adele had worn on her right hand for 42 years. I put it in the breast pocket of the suit, next to the handkerchief. Then I went downstairs, and I got in the car. The drive downtown took 38 minutes. I did not turn on the radio. I did not rehearse the sentence again. I drove. I passed the community center where Ray and Miguel and the others would be watching the news later. I passed the exit that would have taken me to the cemetery where Adele was buried. I passed the old office building where I had run the creative shop from 1979 to 1996, the shop where Jasmine had first walked in as a 23-year-old with a portfolio too large for the elevator. I turned onto the boulevard that led to the hotel. 2 blocks out, I saw the marquee, my name in lights, in honor of Gordon Whitfield. My son had put my name in lights over the front door of a building he was about to be arrested in. I pulled into the valet loop. A young man in a red vest opened my door. He said, "Mr. Whitfield, welcome. Your family has been asking after you." I thanked him. I stepped out. I straightened the pewter tie. I walked toward the atrium doors. In the reflection of the glass, I saw myself for 1 second, an old man in a midnight blue suit, a small silver ring in his breast pocket, a folded floor plan in his inside jacket pocket, and on his face an expression that Adele would have recognized from photographs taken in 1987. The doors opened inward. Cameron was waiting in the foyer. He saw me and he lit up. He crossed the marble floor in 6 long strides and took my elbow and turned me toward the atrium. "Dad, there you are. Come in, come in. Everyone is here. Everyone is asking about you." I let him steer me. Over his shoulder, I saw Nadine at the far end of the foyer, standing beside a floral arrangement. Our eyes met. She nodded once. My hand did not tremble. In the crowd beyond the doors, I saw, at various distances and various tables, faces I recognized. Terrence in a charcoal suit, seated near the back. Marcus at a side table with a leather portfolio at his elbow. Jasmine at table 9 with a small evening bag in her lap that I knew contained a framed photograph from 1987. And, scattered through the room, 13 other former mentees at 13 other tables, each of them with an envelope beside their water glass. 900 people. 14 on standby. 12 federal agents I would not recognize. 1 nod from Nadine. 1 sentence rehearsed. 1 suit worn for the first time since a funeral. Cameron leaned in and whispered in my ear, "Dad, this is going to be the best night of your life." I turned my head slightly and I looked at him and I said, very quietly, "Cameron, I think you may be right." The doors opened inward, and for a full second the sound of the ballroom struck me like a wall of water. 800 people were already in their seats, and a low ripple of applause started somewhere near the center table and spread outward when they saw who had walked in. I did not raise my hand. I did not smile the way an old man smiles when he wants to be liked. I walked. The midnight blue suit moved with me the way Adele had promised it would, 4 decades ago, in a fitting room on the 3rd floor of a department store that no longer existed. A young server stepped aside. A photographer half lifted his camera and then lowered it, uncertain. I heard someone at a side table say quietly, "That's Whitfield." Someone else answered, "I thought he stopped coming to these." I let both of those sentences pass over me and kept walking. In the 3rd row from the stage, Cameron half rose from his chair. He was already wearing the practiced expression of a proud son. He waved me toward the seat he had reserved. I nodded once, the way a father nods, and did not sit. I kept walking, past his row, straight toward the stage. Behind me, I could feel a second silence beginning to form. Cameron's smile did not falter, but his shoulder shifted a 1/4 inch, and I registered it. He leaned toward Kelsey and murmured something. She did not look at me. She looked at the exit sign above the door I had just come through. Behind Cameron, Preston Alderman sat at a corner table with 2 men in near-identical suits, and Preston lifted his glass in a small, careful salute. I did not return it. I climbed the 4 short steps to the stage and stood at the wing, out of the light, and waited. A member of the recognition committee approached me and whispered, "Sir, we have you in 10 minutes, after Mr. Whitfield's introduction." "That is fine," I said. "Please tell the crew I will be using the full podium." He looked slightly puzzled, but the words carried the register of an instruction, not a request, and he nodded and left. From the wing, I could see Cameron rehearsing under his breath. His lips moved through the exact sequence he had performed in my living room. I felt no anger. I felt the calm of a man watching a controlled demolition begin exactly on schedule. In the front row, Nadine Fielder caught my eye. She lifted one finger. Ready. I lifted one finger back. Now. The lights dimmed. A short film began to play, a montage the committee had produced, 30 years of work, Adele's face flashing by twice at a beach and once at a drafting table. I felt her presence in the room like a second heartbeat and let it steady me. Then Cameron rose. He climbed to the podium with his practiced ease, adjusted the microphone by a millimeter he had already located, and began. "My father," he said, "taught this industry how to listen." A ripple of warm laughter. "He taught me how to inherit a name without earning it," he added, "and then how to earn it anyway." Louder laughter. "He was very good. I had raised him to be good at exactly this." "Tonight," he said, "we honor a man whose signature is on more careers than any of us can count. Please welcome to this stage, my father, Gordon Whitfield." The ballroom rose. The ovation was long. I walked out into it the way a man walks into weather he has prepared for. Cameron opened his arms as I approached and, with the whole room watching, embraced me. Under the applause, he whispered close to my ear, "I love you, Dad." I let the embrace hold a full second longer than he had planned. Then I stepped past him to the microphone. "Thank you," I said. The room quieted at once. I let the silence do a little of the work. Thank you to the Guild. Thank you to the committee. Thank you to my son for arranging tonight. A small, dry laugh from somewhere near the back. I did not smile. I accept this recognition on behalf of everyone in this room who taught me something before I learned to teach anyone else. I paused. Which is most of you. A warmer ripple. My wife, Adele, kept the paper trail of this career. every card, every note, every letter. She used to say that in our business, we do not build monuments, we build ledgers. Names in one column, kindnesses in the other. She said the ledger balances itself if you live long enough. I looked out across the tables. Tonight, the ledger is going to balance in front of you. No laugh. Somewhere near the front, a fork stopped moving against a plate. I lifted the small crystal award. I am going to accept this honor, I said, and then, in a moment, I am going to yield this podium, because there are 14 people in this room who have something to return to me, and I would like the industry to hear it in their own voices. The room did not breathe. Jasmine, I said. In the fourth row on the left, Jasmine Ellery rose. She was wearing black, and she was already holding 2 cards, one in each hand. She walked to the aisle. She did not look at Cameron. Cameron, from his seat, produced a smile that was not quite a smile anymore. She reached the foot of the stage. She raised the card in her right hand. In 1987, she said, and her voice was steady, Gordon Whitfield handed me this. On the back he wrote, in his own hand, 4 words about how to sit through a first pitch without apologizing for my age. She raised her left hand. 6 months ago, I paid $85,000 for a meeting with him that never happened. Cameron Whitfield sold me this second card as an invitation to that meeting. It is a forgery of a card I already had. She lowered both cards. She looked at last at Cameron. You sold me back what your father gave me, she said. You charged me for a name I already carried. She did not raise her voice. She sat down. Cameron's hand on the tablecloth had gone very white at the knuckles. I let the room hold the silence for 4 seconds. Then I said, Terrence. Terrence Boyd rose in the 7th row. Then Angela Barnes rose at the federal table on the right in a jacket that did not quite conceal her badge. Then Marcus Halloran. Then Nadine Fielder. Then a copywriter I had championed in 1979 who now ran her own agency in a coastal city. Then a media buyer who had wept in my office at 24. Then an art director whose first campaign I had rewritten line by line at a diner counter. Then, one by one, 7 more. 14 people standing at 14 tables across an 800-seat ballroom, each holding 2 cards. It looked from the stage like a constellation switching on. Cameron half rose from his chair, then sat back down. Kelsey's face had gone a particular gray I had never seen on it. Preston, at his corner table, set his glass down very carefully, as if it had suddenly become heavy. Each of them, I said into the microphone, is holding the card I actually gave them. And each of them is holding an invoice they were sold for a meeting with me that never occurred. The total amount charged against my name, so far confirmed, is $47 million. A sound went through the room that was not a gasp. It was more like a room remembering how to breathe. I asked them to come tonight, I continued, because I did not want a courtroom to be the first place this was said out loud. I wanted this industry to hear it in the voice of the industry. I turned my head just slightly toward my son, Cameron. The whole room turned with me. Cameron opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Do you recognize the card in Jasmine's right hand? He did not answer. It is one of the 72 I inventoried missing from the cabinet in my basement, the cabinet in the house you grew up in, the cabinet you were given a key to in the winter of 2019 because I was too tired to move furniture alone. He still did not answer. I turned back to the microphone. One at a time, I said, would each of you please hold up the invoice you were sold and read aloud the amount printed on it? Jasmine went first. $85,000. Terrence, $120,000. Angela did not read hers. She folded it and put it in her pocket, and the room understood that gesture. Marcus, $95,000. On it went. 14 amounts, each spoken clearly. When the last one settled, the total in the room was somewhere over $3 million just from the standing witnesses. And the ballroom knew from those 14 voices that behind them stood 326 more. Cameron finally stood, his chair scraped. He walked halfway to the aisle and stopped. "Dad," he said, "there has been a misunderstanding of the licensing structure. If you'll let me clarify." "There is no licensing structure," I said. "There is one clause in the document you asked me to sign at my kitchen table, and it requires my live video authorization for any release of any card. You did not obtain that authorization for any of the transactions Jasmine, Terrence, Marcus, or any of the others in this room paid you for, which means every one of those releases was fraudulent under the agreement your own attorney drafted for you." His face changed. It was the face of a man who has just understood the shape of the trap in the second the door closes. "That is not," he began. "It is," I said. "You wrote yourself into wire fraud with your own signature, and you did it 340 times. Kelsey was already reaching for her handbag. Preston was already looking at the exits. And in the 4 seconds after I stopped speaking, the double doors at the back of the ballroom, the same doors I had walked through less than an hour before, opened once again, this time from the outside, and a line of dark suits began, quietly and without hurry, to walk in. There were 6 of them at first, then 8, then 12. They did not shout. They did not draw. They walked in the way a tide walks in, unhurried, unopposable, already halfway to shore. Angela Barnes stepped down from her table and met the lead agent in the center aisle. She showed him something with the flat of her hand and pointed once at Cameron. Then she pointed once at Kelsey. Then she pointed twice at the corner table where Preston Alderman sat. The lead agent nodded. He did not look at me. He did not need to. 2 agents peeled off toward Cameron's row, 2 toward Kelsey, 2 toward Preston. The remaining agents fanned to the exits. The ballroom, all 800 of it, did not stand and did not sit. It held. Someone at a back table began to whisper, and a hand rose from another table and hushed them. I stayed at the microphone. I did not narrate. I did not gloat. I let the room witness the thing it had come, without knowing it, to witness. Cameron looked up at me from 20 feet away. His mouth formed the word "Dad." I did not answer. I placed the small crystal award very gently on the podium and stepped back. The 2 agents at Cameron's row asked him, quietly, to place his hands where they could see them. He did. They asked him to stand. He did. They read him his rights in a voice pitched low enough that only the tables directly around him could hear, and loud enough that everyone in the ballroom knew what the cadence was. Then they walked him toward the aisle. Kelsey was already crying without sound. She was cuffed at her own table, out of view of most of the room, and walked out along the wall, staggering slightly in her heels. Cameron they walked straight down the center aisle. 800 faces watched him pass. He did not look up. He did not look at me. Halfway to the door, he turned his head slightly, once, toward Preston's corner. Preston did not meet his eyes. When Cameron reached the back of the ballroom, he paused, for the smallest possible second, at the same threshold I had crossed a lifetime ago in a midnight blue suit. Then the agents guided him through the door and out into the hotel lobby, and the doors closed behind him with the small, soft click of a cabinet being locked in a basement. In the front row, an old copywriter I had known for 40 years put her hand to her mouth and did not lower it. Preston Alderman was not walked out. Preston tried to walk himself out. He stood, adjusted his cufflink, and moved with an air of casual confidence toward the side exit that opened onto the hotel lobby. 2 agents shadowed him at a courteous distance. He reached the lobby. A security camera in the corner of the ceiling was, as it always is, watching, and Preston, who had spent 30 years assuming he could talk his way out of rooms, made the mistake of trying to talk. "Gentlemen," he said to the agents, "this is a private business matter. If we could step somewhere quiet, I can walk you through the corporate structure. The father, frankly, has always been, how shall I say, decoratively involved. He signed everything, he signed every release, he knew every wire. This was a family enterprise, and I was a passive investor. Ask him." One of the agents, a woman about half his age, replied evenly, "Sir, we have not asked you anything yet." Preston blinked. "I was clarifying." "Sir," she said, "please stop clarifying." He kept clarifying. He clarified for another 90 seconds. He named amounts, he named accounts, he named the shell in Kelsey's maiden name. He effectively read himself his own rights before the agents finished walking up to him, and the ceiling camera recorded all of it in high definition. Later, I did not see this, but Angela described it to me afterward. Cameron and Kelsey were placed in adjacent holding cells at the federal facility downtown, waiting to be processed. The cells were separated by concrete and by a short corridor and by a small barred window at head height that allowed sound to travel. Cameron began immediately to speak through it. "Kelsey, tell them it was Preston. Tell them the archive was Preston's idea. Tell them you didn't know." Kelsey's answer came back flat. "The archive was your idea, Cameron. You had a key to the basement. I never went in the basement." "Kelsey, you told me your father wanted us to sell them." "Kelsey, please." "You told me he was losing his memory. You told me he asked us to. You told me it was his gift to us." "Kelsey, you told me a lot of things, Cameron." There was a long silence. Then Cameron said very quietly, "You'll be charged too." "I know," Kelsey said. "I've been talking to my attorney all afternoon. He came in an hour before your speech." Another silence. Then Cameron began to weep very softly into his hands. And Kelsey, on the other side of the concrete, sat perfectly still and said nothing more. When I finally left the ballroom, it was near midnight, and a light rain had begun. Angela was waiting for me at the curb under the hotel awning. She had taken off her jacket. Underneath, her badge hung on a lanyard. "Gordon," she said. "It went as clean as anything I've ever seen go." "The camera in the lobby?" I asked. She almost smiled. "He gave us the full case in 90 seconds. He named the shell, he named the accounts, he named your daughter-in-law. He told us your son was the architect. He offered to trade all of it for a walk. He offered so aggressively that if he tried to recant it tomorrow, no court in this country would let him." "Good," I said. "And the wires from 9 days?" "Captured live. 2 of them cleared while the standing ovation was still going in there." She nodded back toward the ballroom. "Your son sold access to you while you were being applauded for having a legacy. It will look very tidy in front of a jury." I looked past her, up the street, at the rain moving across the streetlights. "How long do you think?" I asked. She considered. "For Cameron, a long time. This is not a case they will plead down." I nodded. Then I asked her to drive me home. The craftsman was dark when I walked in. Adele's chair in the corner of the front room sat exactly as I had left it. I did not turn on the overhead light. I took off the midnight blue suit jacket and hung it, carefully, on the hook by the door. The same hook she had installed with her own drill in 1994. I sat down at the kitchen table. I did not eat. I did not pour a drink. I put my hands flat on the wood, and I said, aloud, into the empty room, "Adele, it is done." The house did not answer, because houses do not, but the silence in it had changed shape. It was no longer the silence of a room holding its breath. It was the silence of a room exhaling. Somewhere upstairs, the old radiator ticked once, cooling. I sat there for a long time. I thought about the winter of 2019, when I had handed a key to a young man I had once carried on my shoulders through this same kitchen. I thought about how long it takes a person to become who they are, and how quickly, sometimes, that person can be lost. Then I stood up, washed one cup, dried it, and put it back in the cupboard where Adele had always kept it. Tomorrow was already beginning to have a shape. The indictment came down on a Tuesday, 17 days later. It ran to 184 counts: wire fraud, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, 340 separate counts, money laundering across 3 shell entities, 1 count of interstate transportation of stolen property for a set of cards Cameron had personally driven from my basement to a private office in a city 3 states east. The prosecutor called a short press conference on the courthouse steps and used one sentence I remembered afterward. The defendants, she said, did not steal money from Mr. Whitfield. They stole his name, and then they used his name to steal from the people he had spent his life helping. She did not name me at the podium. She did not need to. That evening, Angela came by the house with a redacted copy of the charging document and set it on the kitchen table. "You do not have to read it," she said. "I know. I will read it," I said. She left. I read it cover to cover at the same table where Cameron had once slid a legacy license agreement toward me with a warm hand. Every count landed like a small, precise weight. When I finished, I closed the folder and set it deliberately on the shelf next to Adele's binders. It belonged with the ledger. Kelsey's cooperator agreement was signed 6 days after the indictment. Marcus called me from his car on the way out of the federal courthouse. "She flipped fully," he said. "Everything, 6 years of it. She's giving them the account map, the client list, the invoicing template, and, this is the part you should know, she is giving them a signed affidavit that Cameron told her, in her words, the archive was always Cameron's idea, and his father is too senile to notice." "Senile?" I said. "Yes." I did not respond. Marcus went on. "She'll do time, probably 3 years, based on her role. Preston is furious. Cameron," he paused, "Cameron filed a divorce petition from custody this morning." "This morning?" "This morning, in pencil on a form the guard handed him. He wrote in the reason line, 'irreconcilable differences.'" I laughed once without humor. 6 years of a partnership, 40 transactions a month, 340 victims, and Cameron had summarized it as irreconcilable differences in a holding cell. "He does not yet understand," Marcus said, "that Kelsey's cooperation is the whole floor of his case. Once she testifies, there is no oxygen left in the room for him." "Let him understand it slowly," I said. "That is one thing I will not rush." Marcus was quiet a moment. Then he said, "Understood, Gordon." The trial was not long. Kelsey testified for 2 full days. Preston's own lobby confession played in high definition on a courtroom monitor for 11 uninterrupted minutes. 14 former mentees testified in sequence, each carrying the same 2 cards they had held in the ballroom. Jasmine testified last. When she stepped down from the witness stand, she did not look at Cameron. She looked at me. I nodded once. Cameron's defense argued at the end that he had believed the licensing agreement I had signed authorized every transaction. The prosecutor rose and read aloud the one Marcus drafted clause requiring live video authorization, and then she read aloud the list of every transaction that had not obtained one. The clause was 91 words long. The list took 46 minutes to read. The jury was out for less than a full afternoon. Cameron did not look at me when the verdict came in. He looked at his hands. Guilty on 182 of 184 counts. The judge accepted the verdict at 4:27 on a Thursday. Sentencing was set for 6 weeks out. I walked out of the courthouse alone, into a light snow that had just started to fall, and Terrence caught up with me at the corner and put a hand on my shoulder, and neither of us needed to say anything. The sentencing hearing took a full morning. The judge read the loss table into the record. $47 million in aggregate wire fraud proceeds, 340 verified victims, 6 years of continuous scheme. She read letters from 12 victims, including a hedge fund partner who had wired $12 million for a founder cluster access contract that had never existed. She read a letter from Jasmine that made 3 people in the gallery cry. Then she pronounced sentence. Cameron Whitfield, 22 years, no parole. A restitution order of $47 million, joint and several with his co-defendants. Preston Alderman, 12 years, no parole. Restitution shared. Kelsey Whitfield, cooperator, 4 years, restitution shared with a downward departure noted for substantial assistance. The judge added, in a voice I will remember, the defendants did not merely defraud strangers. They monetized the trust that a lifetime of decent conduct had accumulated. That is not a financial crime alone. It is a theft of character. Cameron did not react. Preston tried to speak, and his own attorney put a hand on his sleeve. Kelsey looked at her lap. Outside the courtroom on the marble steps, a reporter asked me if I had a comment. I said, "The ledger is closed." She wrote it down carefully, and I walked to the car where Terrence was waiting with the engine running. 2 weeks after sentencing, the seizure orders were executed. The Shell LLC that had received the $85,000 from Jasmine, the $12 million from the hedge fund, and the $2.5 million from a wealthy stranger who had believed he was buying a board seat, all its accounts were frozen and its holdings inventoried. The real estate portfolio in Kelsey's maiden name, 3 condominiums, 1 lake house, 1 storefront in a district that had been gentrifying for a decade, was placed under federal receivership. Cameron's own home, which he and Kelsey had refinanced twice against the fraud proceeds, was scheduled for auction. Kelsey's parents, who had unknowingly hosted a title deed to one of the condominiums, cooperated fully and were not charged. Preston's boat, a 52-foot cruiser he had christened, without irony, Reintroduction, was towed from its slip by a flatbed with 3 federal marshals as escort. The total recovery, once liquidated, would return roughly $19 million to victims, a partial restitution, not a full one. Marcus told me, gently, that full restitution in a case this large almost never occurred. I told him I understood. And then, at the kitchen table, over a cup of coffee Adele would have brewed exactly the same way, I told him what I intended to do with any portion of the recovery that eventually returned to me. I do not want the money, I said. Marcus set his cup down. None of it? None of it. Every dollar the government eventually routes back to me, under whatever line item, as victim share or otherwise, I want redirected. Redirected where? To a scholarship. For whom? For young art directors, copywriters, media buyers, and account planners under 28, from small towns and immigrant families and community colleges, who have no idea how a room like the one at the Gala works and no one to introduce them to it. Marcus was writing. What do you want to call it? I did not hesitate. The Adele Whitfield Mentee Scholarship. He stopped writing. He looked up. He nodded, slowly. It will need a board, he said. It will need me to not run it. Correct. Nadine will run it. Terrence will keep the books. Angela will not sit on it for propriety, but she will make sure the wire structure is clean. Marcus wrote all of it down. Then he set the pen aside and said, Gordon, I need to tell you something. This is the cleanest thing I have seen a client do at the back end of a case like this. It will outlive us. It is not for me, I said. It is for the ledger. The months that followed were long, and I did not rush them. I returned, quietly, to the community center on 3rd Street. I resumed my Wednesday and Friday resume hours. The veterans did not ask me about the trial. Ray, on the 2nd Friday I came back, set a paper cup of coffee at my elbow without a word and settled into his chair. "Missed you," he said, and that was the whole speech. I nodded, and we opened the first resume of the morning. Cameron's appellate attorneys filed in the spring. They challenged the sufficiency of Kelsey's cooperator testimony and moved to suppress the lobby video of Preston's confession. Marcus read every filing to me over coffee at my kitchen table. In the late summer, the appellate court ruled. The appeal was denied in a written opinion that ran 41 pages, holding that the cooperator testimony was independently corroborated by the 72-card inventory Adele had maintained, and that Preston had unambiguously waived his rights on the lobby camera. Cameron's 22 years would stand. Marcus set the opinion down between us. "It is over," he said. "It has been over," I said. "But now it is officially over." I refilled his cup. Outside, a slow rain had begun to fall on the roses Adele had planted the year she died, and they were, somehow, still blooming. 1 year, 3 days after the gala, we held the first Adele Whitfield Mentee Scholarship Dinner. Nadine had booked the same ballroom in the same downtown hotel. She had said, "It should be here. It should be where it began." I had not argued. The room, when I walked into it that Saturday evening, looked almost identical to the room I had walked into a year earlier. The same chandeliers, the same long tables, the same soft applause rising to meet me. But the faces were different. 300 former mentees had come from 21 states and 4 countries. And beside each of them, at each place setting, sat a younger person, a first-year copywriter, a scholarship art director, a media buyer whose parents had never set foot inside a room like this. 600 people at those tables, and half of them were under 28, and each of them was there because someone had answered a phone call from an old man who remembered their name. I did not wear the midnight blue suit that night. I wore a simple gray one Adele had liked. I did not walk in first. I let Nadine take the podium and speak, and I sat in the 3rd row at a table with Jasmine on my right and Terrence on my left, and let the room be theirs. Nadine spoke briefly. She read out the names of the first 30 scholarship recipients, and each of them stood at their table to a warm ovation. She read the names of the 12 host mentors, one for each recipient, and each of them stood. She thanked the board. She thanked the industry. She did not mention Cameron. She did not need to. She said one sentence I will remember. The founder of this scholarship, she said, asked that his name not be on it. He asked that his wife's name go there instead. He said, and I quote, "She kept the ledger. I only signed the cards." There was a pause, and then the room stood, all 600 of them, and the ovation went on for a very long time. I did not stand. I sat with my hands folded on the tablecloth, and I let it come. When at last it settled, Nadine said, "Before dinner, one of tonight's guests has asked for a small moment. She has said she will only take 2 minutes." Nadine smiled. I have never known her to take 2 minutes, but we shall see. A ripple of gentle laughter. And Jasmine Ellery rose from the chair to my right and walked, without hurrying, up to the podium, carrying a single small card between 2 fingers. "1 year ago," she said, "in the small kitchen." The room went so quiet the whole ballroom could hear her. "1 year ago," she said, "in this room I stood up holding 2 cards. One of them was a card Gordon Whitfield gave me in the summer of 1987 after my very first pitch, on which he had written 4 words about how to sit through a first meeting. The other one was a forgery I had paid $85,000 for." She held up a single card between 2 fingers. "I brought only one of them back tonight." A soft laugh, and then silence again. "This is the 1987 card. I asked Gordon last week if I could borrow it for a single day. I brought it here, and I would like, if he'll allow me, to return it to him at his own table, in front of all of you." She stepped down from the podium. She walked slowly up the center aisle, past the tables of 600 people, all of them turned in their chairs to watch her come. She stopped at my table. She held out the card. She said, Gordon, thank you for 1987 and for last October. I stood. I took the card from her hand. I turned it over. I had written on the back of it that morning in the same steady hand I had used in 1987 and never entirely lost. I read what I had written aloud so that the room could hear it. Kept, I said, with thanks. The network held. I held the card up between two fingers so the tables closest to us could see. Jasmine's eyes shone. I handed the card back to her. It has always been yours, I said. I only wrote your name on it. She put the card in the inside pocket of her jacket, close to her heart, and returned quietly to her seat. I remained standing a moment longer. I looked out at the room. I thought of Adele. I thought of a basement cabinet full of ordered paper, and of a son who had believed that paper was the treasure. And I said into the quiet, one sentence, the only line of anything like a lesson I have ever delivered in a public room. In our trade, I said, we do not build monuments. We build ledgers. And a ledger, if you live long enough and answer your phone, balances itself. I sat down. The room did not applaud right away. It waited a full breath, and then, gently, it did. So that is the story. My son tried to sell my life. The people my life had touched rose in a single room and closed the account. Cameron is in a federal facility on the second year of a 22-year sentence with no parole and a denied appeal. Preston is 4 states away, 12 years to run. Kelsey served her term, moved to a coastal city, and works, I am told, at a small nonprofit that helps women leave partnerships that have gone bad. The scholarship enters its 2nd class this fall. I still keep Wednesday and Friday resume hours at the community center on 3rd Street, and Ray still brings the coffee. Now, before you go, tell me in the comments about the person who introduced you to the room you are in today. Say their name out loud if you can. I read every one. If this story reached something in you, share it with someone who has been mistaken for weak because they were quiet, or mistaken for finished because they were kind. And if you want more stories about dignity, patience, and the slow, patient way quiet justice closes an account, subscribe. This channel is a ledger too. Names in one column, kindnesses in the other. I will see you in the next one. Thank you for staying to the end.